Okay. Okay, so an unusual subject, Don Giovanni and architecture. Why Don Giovanni? Because today, 234 years ago, Mozart took place in Prague the first representation of the opera by Mozart, Don Giovanni, a very famous work by this very unusually gifted composer. So I thought of attacking this subject, Don Giovanni and architecture. And it seems certain architects, very important today, are more or less explicitly connected with Don Giovanni, and I will explain why. First, Frank Gehry, who did the stage design for the opera Don Giovanni in Los Angeles. And I will read a few things about this, and then I'll show images, and then I will show images of the building where this opera was performed in Los Angeles, also built by Frank Gehry. You probably know it, the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. So let's read. Three of the greatest operas ever written were collaborations between librettist Lorenzo da Ponte and composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte. Over the next 3 years, the Los Angeles Philharmonic will present the trilogy, one opera each season, each conducted by Gustavo Dudamel. Set designs will be created by three of the most well, this is, the future tense, but the text, I think, is from 2012. So what I'm reading, the event took already place. Set designs were created, let me correct the text, were created by three of the most influential architects of our time, and each architect worked with leading fashion designers to create a unique and distinctive visual setting for each of these timeless masterpieces. Each complete opera performance it took place at Walt Disney Concert Hall. So this is an image with a stage design by Frank Gehry. What he took, actually, I will read. I have another piece of text written by him. Essentially, he did this stage design with huge paper rolls. And I like this kind of stage design because it's it doesn't cost a lot, really. It's sustainable, and it's interesting visually. And it connects, of course, with his interests in, fragmentation and so on. So using 80 rolls of paper, architect Frank Gehry transformed a venue ill-suited for theatrical performances with a strikingly simple yet effective stage design. The Los Angeles Philharmonic's Don Giovanni, showed earlier in that year at the city's Walt Disney's Concert Hall, which Gehry himself realized in 2003. For the Giovanni project, one of the biggest challenges was that posed by the space itself. The hall was built as a symphonic venue, meaning it didn't have the elements of a typical theater stage. No curtain, orchestra pit, wings, or flyloft rigging system. And Gehry and co-designer sisters Kate and Laura Molloy of fashion label Rodarte, I never heard of it, but I guess it's a famous one, needed to ensure the theatrical performance could flow seamlessly in such a space. Inspired by the pages of Giovanni's sex book, they designed a slew of king-sized white pages that look as though a giant crumpled and dropped them on stage. forming a marble backdrop to actors. The forms made of 2.7 meters wide paper rolls also separate actors from the orchestra, which sits on a plane elevated about 1 meter at the back of the stage. The architect concept designer trend will continue, continued at the Los Angeles Philharmonic the next year with Jean Nouvel, when Jean Nouvel designed the Marriage of Figaro, and then Zaha Hadid was scheduled to do the Così fan tutte in 2014. I actually am emotional now because I see greatness here. I see important architects, you know, collaborating with other fields, with musicians, with orchestras, with you know, great masterpieces by Mozart. And I really think we need something like this here in our country as well. It's enough with the architect just being the slave of some banal jobs and not asserting the architects culturally in a wide way, as these people did and do. And that's why I chose to talk about this, because we must change something here in this country. We cannot continue to minimize the role of the architect in society. So yeah, of course it is you know, provocative and inspiring to see that a man who was close to 90, well, no, maybe not, well, over 80, Frank Gehry, when he designed this, when most people are actually retired, and if they are alive, they watch TV in apathy, this man was still creating, and besides the many buildings he was working on. And let's read. This is, well, who wrote this? This is an inspiring opportunity to work with my friends. This is what Frank Gehry said, with my friends at the Los Angeles Philharmonic. This is a project very close to Gustavo Dudamel's heart. He knows the music like the back of his hand and has a unique vision that I find very exciting, says Gehry. Kate and Laura's work reminds me of my early days. It is free and fearless and not precious. Let's read again. It is free and fearless and not precious. And I think our work should also be free and fearless and not precious. Gehry envisions a set that he describes as a moving still life on stage that works in concert with the costumes and supports the music of Don Giovanni. Gehry's modifications will take place, took place the orchestra upstage on raised lifts approximately 3.5 feet above the action taking place downstage. The choir benches would be removed to allow space for the orchestra. This layout aimed to create a unified ensemble between the orchestra and soloists. You know, the problem was that this space was not designed for this kind of performance. So he had to change things around, although he was the one who designed the building, and I am going to show the building in a few minutes. With a focus on the action at the front of the stage, creating intimacy between the soloist and the audience. This configuration had recently been tested in a rehearsal with Gustavo Dudamel and Yasuhisa Toyota, the chief acoustician who collaborated with Gehry and the Los Angeles Philharmonic to develop Walt Disney Concerts Hall visual and acoustic designs. So here you have a group of brilliant people, you know, a conductor, an acoustician from Japan, you know, Gehry from the United States. And this is really what art is about. It's about bringing people together with energy, with inspiration, with exuberance, and giving meaning actually to their lives and to the lives of other people. And so here it is. Again, this opera took place in the building designed by Frank Gehry. Here he is with, I guess, maybe that's the Japanese acoustician, or I don't know who he is. Anyway, look at Gehry, a man of 80, over 80, yes, and now he's over 90 and still producing things that are, you know, disturbing some and, you know, bringing joy to others. This is a sketch he did for the, you know, for the stage design. And here they are, the actors, the audience. Well, before the pandemic, there was no fear of, you know, being in close proximity, and the orchestra behind. And this is what art is. I kept saying, and I keep saying, that the oldest definition of art that I found is from the Proto-Indo-European language, and it is art equals bridge equals God. So art is about bringing people together. And this is what we look at right now in this picture. Art brings people together, not just in space, but also in time, because here it was about an opera composed, you know, 250 years ago almost, by Mozart. And I think it's beautiful, because it was said that art transgresses death, or could transgress death. And it is true. It is true. It is maybe the only medium which has this power. Okay, it's a very vulnerable medium. It is maybe in part an illusion, but we need such illusions. And what would life be without them? So let's look at the building where this opera was performed, the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles by Frank Gehry. You probably know it. I mean, you know, he built a number of buildings kind of similar, but imagine that Don Giovanni was performed in this building in that year. I think it was 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And after this is where it was performed, you know, the next two operas by Mozart with the designs by Jean Nouvel and Zaha Hadid. And you wonder, you know, how come these people who built so much and built so much, Jean Nouvel is alive, Frank Gehry is alive, even Zaha Hadid is alive. I mean, yes, she died, but her influence and her office continue. How come they had so-called time to even do stage design, you know, for such an important opera, and, you know, played, performed in a, you know, large city and so on? Well, it's about passion. When you have passion, of course you find time, you know, because it's creativity, it's pleasure. It's actually pleasure. Anyway, so Los Angeles. And the building, the typical Frank Gehry architecture, which some people criticize, but I still think he has to be admired for bringing something new to architecture. But this newness is actually derived, as he himself said, from Bernini, from the great Roman Baroque architect and artist. He received a lot of impetus and inspiration from the great Bernini, one of the great Baroque forces in art. Himself, you know, handling several balls, so to speak, because he did sculpture. He was mainly a sculptor. He also did architecture and painting and drawing and all the rest. So Frank Gehry, who had and has a good relationship with artists, and it shows in his buildings. Now, we cannot imagine that you can do such a building working with a T-square and a rectangle. It's not possible. It is simply not possible. This man, Frank Gehry, has at his disposal a large factory in a way, you know, very well equipped, like NASA. And that's how they are able to do this. I visited Fondation Louis Vuitton in Paris with some students from Bucharest. And I have to tell you, I didn't go with great expectations. I didn't like the building so much from where I saw it in magazines or on the web. But when I arrived there, especially at the top of the building, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was shocked in the good sense of the word. The structure is absolutely amazing. Amazing. I mean, we cannot even draw it. what he built, we can't even draw. We can't even imagine. So there, you know, those who throw stones at Frank Gehry should think twice and should visit his buildings. Buildings which are actually adventures. Well, you know, certain things could be perhaps criticized, but then you can criticize anything. But this man was pushing the limits of architecture in his own way. You know, other people do it in a different way. But I think there is room in this world for everybody. The idea is not to succumb to apathy, to indifference, to non-activity, and to lack of creativity. That's the idea. How you express your creativity, this is really up to you. And of course, the context matters. But we create the context. We cannot accuse the context continuously that it is the cause of our inactivity. No, we have to change it if it's not auspicious. You know, I mean, this is one of the many buildings that Frank Gehry designed. And, you know, there are creative things here going on. I mean, just try to imagine. I actually saw the retrospective of his work some good years ago in New York at the Guggenheim Museum, and I was able to enter a model. Yes, the model was so big that there was a chair, actually. It was a concert hall. I don't know if it wasn't exactly this one. I don't know. I don't remember. But I sat on a chair inside the model. Now, unfortunately, to have the models come to New York City from Los Angeles, I read in a newspaper, it was immensely expensive. $8 million were spent just to organize this exhibition. And of course, to me, this is not very sustainable, but you know, art, culture sometimes require, you know, financial efforts. And if they afforded it, what can we say? Personally, I would not have done it, but nobody asked me what my opinion is about this. Anyway, I appreciate the fact that, you know, things are happening in the world, and they are happening to the extent they are fueled by exuberance, by creativity. And we need creativity, otherwise we die in irrelevance, and we die in boredom, and a life spent in boredom is an unlived life. Anyway, so the drawings of the building, you saw the building. Don Giovanni was performed inside this drone project. In a way, it is very beautiful. I mean, just think of it. You know, Mozart, of course, didn't know that 200, let's say 50 years later, his opera would be performed in Los Angeles. Well, at that time, Los Angeles didn't exist. You know, I mean, it is beautiful, you know, 250 years later, opera Don Giovanni was to be performed in a city which at the time when Mozart, you know, composed it, didn't even exist. And anyway, he didn't know, of course, about Frank Gehry, and he didn't know about Jean Nouvel, and he didn't know about Zaha Hadid. Well, with Zaha probably already he met, and they probably became good friends. You see, we imagine that, you know, the masters of the past were superior to the masters of the present. But I think across space and time, there is a oneness in a way, you know, and, you know, in my imagination and maybe my dreaming, I like to think that, you know, maybe at this very moment, Mozart is having a chat with Zaha Hadid, wherever they are, and maybe drink a coffee, and maybe Mozart will smoke a cigarette, and they will say, do you see, Zaha, what's happening in Bucharest? They are talking about us at this very moment, and they are showing the plan of the building of our friend Frank, you know, and that's where they perform my opera, Zaha, and you will be the next stage designer for the other opera, Così fan tutte. Something like this. Anyway, let's enjoy art, because without it, you know what kind of life we have. Anyway, it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. Mozart, Frank Gehry, Zaha, Jean Nouvel, and so on. And yeah, you know, the malicious ones could very well, you know, contest certain things and throw stones and criticize. But things are moving, you know, they are moving because of such people who are restless and who create continuously. And, you know, it's really beyond, I mean, I don't think what matters here is the personal taste, because I could like this building and someone else could not like it. But I think, we all can admire, you know, a tenacious desire to give meaning to life through creativity and to create a new cosmos of hope in a way. You know, this kind of building could not have been built, you know, even 20 or 30 years ago. It was built, you know, now. Now we arrive at another, I would say, a provocative building, much smaller, designed by Kopp Himmelblau, Wolf Prix in particular. He is the founder of this office. He had a partner, and then now he has another partner, but he is the main force there. A mini opera space in München. And why do I show this work here? Because it is connected with Don Giovanni, and I will explain a little bit later. This text I took from the office itself, I mean from their website, and there was this title, Soundscaping. This is a sketch made by Wolf Prix. And let me read. The task which we had to solve with our design was to create a space with 300 seats or 700 people standing spectators for experimental performances of the Bavarian State Opera. The pavilion should be dismountable, transportable, and remountable, and make the respective urban space distinctive through its shape. Mass and therefore weight are the decisive criteria for good acoustics. The conception of the Pavilion 21 mini opera space therefore had to overcome a contradiction, to design a lightweight construction which must allow to be dis and reassembled quickly, but which at the same time meets the acoustical requirements of a concert hall. Hence, how do we create the conditions for good acoustics despite a reduction of mass? Already the first considerations fixed in drawings show the basic concept of the pavilion to introduce elements which are on the one hand, the spatial transformation of sound sequences, and which on the other hand, develop sound reflecting and absorbing properties through their pyramid-like shape, soundscaping. The idea to combine architecture with music is not new. Also, the term soundscaping is not new. Similar to landscaping, it involves gestalt. Soundscaping originates in the 1940s and designates a method of composing. In architecture, Le Corbusier and Yannis Xenakis, I repeat, born in Brăila, together engage in the topic of music and architecture when they thought about three-dimensional implementation of musical compositions. Le Corbusier's Philips Pavilion and the partition of the windows in La Tourette. I will show at the end of this presentation the Philips Pavilion by Le Corbusier. As a starting point towards the abstraction of music into spatial form, a sequence from the song Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix and the passage from Don Giovanni by Mozart were transcribed. Through the analysis of frequency sections from these pieces of music and through the combination with the computer-generated 3D model, the sequences are translated into pyramidal spike constructions by means of parametric scripting. And this is the building. Again, you know, if we have two choices really in architecture, and not just in architecture, in life itself, to follow the already traced and you know, used old paths, or to create a new path. This is a new building. It's a building which is provocative, which is engaging, which is indeed, maybe its undeclared purpose was to épate la bourgeoisie. But strangely, maybe most of the clients of the building, or those who use it, are exactly part of that you know, segment of society which we call the bourgeoisie. I like this building, and I will show a diagram where you will see how Don Giovanni became a tool in the hands of the architects to create the building. Now, yes, maybe, well, it was written that these spikes that attack the street where these pyramids were made in order to deflect the noise of the cars. So there would be silence. I mean, there would be the adequate, you know, sound conditions within the opera pavilion. But I think this is maybe only part of the explanation. I think these spikes, these pyramids that attack outwardly, they might also represent, you know, a certain disposition from the side of the architects towards provocative gestures. And here it is. You see, Don Giovanni, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, they recorded the frequencies emanated by the music, and in some they created a sonogram, and through scripting and programming, somehow they arrived from here. And as I read, there were two musical sources. One was from Jimi Hendrix and one from Mozart. And combining them, you know, somehow, you know, they arrived at, you know, the musicality of this, you know, architectonic configuration or geometric configuration, which became the building. Well, you know, this is kind of the explanation in what way Don Giovanni insinuated itself into the making of the building. You see at the top, Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze. They recorded the frequencies of his music, then the frequencies of Mozart's music. And well, I don't know if the linear connection is so smooth, you know, maybe, I mean, I don't know. But one thing is for sure, the building that they arrived at is interesting and is engaging. And indeed, you see a relationship between music and architecture. We all know that architecture was called frozen music. Well, you know, those are the words. But from this statement to arrive at a building that functions and is interesting, there is a little bit of a distance. Anyway, it was built. And not only that it was built, but it is easily demountable, and it can be rebuilt apparently quickly in some other place. It is clear to me that art, when it is significant, brings something new. If it doesn't bring something new, it will be forgotten. So we have to choose in our lives. Do we do things without any relevance for the future, or we do things with some relevance? I know we are confronted now with all kinds of things, the climate change, you know, sustainability, the rising levels of the seas, the melting of the icebergs. Things are not simple, but I think even with very modest means, we could assert an art and an architecture that are alive and which do not repeat things of, you know, that are already done. Yes, this is a provocative building, And, you know, it's almost amazing that it was built and that it was accepted by those who commissioned it. But you see, it is possible. It is possible to do exceptional things if you believe in what you are doing and you have the tools to you know, make it possible. In a way, what we look at here is a building which proclaims the freedom of art. As it is written on the facade of the secessionist building in Vienna, to each time its art, and to art its freedom. And this must be understood everywhere in this world, and not now, every time. To each time, it's art. So you cannot make an art today or an architecture today, you know, repeating something that was made, I don't know, 150 years ago. You have to create an art and an architecture for your time. So to each time it's art, and to art it's freedom. Without freedom, art cannot be. This must be understood. Anyway, it's an interesting building. I like it, and it works. And apparently the acoustics are excellent. And look at the building, and look at that big tree, or those big trees there. You know, you have nature and culture. Maybe the culture is a little bit aggressive, but it's really the emotion of the artist, the emotion of the, sometimes, I mean, not sometimes, often the artist is struggling. So there is this aspect to art, the struggle. And the building in a way expresses this, you know, it's a building that engages the street, and maybe it even screams a little bit to the street. It is as if the art wants to get out of its skin somehow and extend itself in its conflict with passing cars, or maybe with apathetic passers-by or whatever. Inside, yes, we have bars, we have joie de vivre, we have, you know, it's München, you know, a rich city with a high level of life. And but you know, that high level of life cannot say no to art. They need art. The bankers need art. And you see here in the lower corner the ideogram, or the graphic symbol of the pavilion. Is right here. And you know, it's kind of nice. You know, you see it here as a bidimensional little vignette, and then you look at the building which was built, and it was built coherently, with courage, with knowledge, with high technology, with inspiration coming from Jimi Hendrix and Mozart. And here you see, I don't know, it's either the dismantling of the building or vice versa, the building of it, but whatever, it works, and it was meant to be easily demountable and rebuilt. Now I end this presentation on Don Giovanni and architecture, because I read the text from Kop Himmelblau's website about the Philips Pavilion in Brussels in 1959, when Le Corbusier collaborated with Yannis Xenakis. Yannis Xenakis had his parents Greek, but he was born in Romania, in Brăila, and he left Brăila when he was 9 years old. Then he went to Athens, and there he studied engineering. Actually, he didn't study architecture, but then after the war, he went to Paris, was employed by Le Corbusier, and they did this remarkable work. In my opinion, one of the best buildings of the 20th century. Unfortunately, it was destroyed. And many think that actually Yannis Xenakis was the true author of the building, because Yannis Xenakis had this interest in marrying music and architecture. And Yannis Xenakis, besides being a gifted architect, although he never studied architecture, he studied engineering and mathematics, I think, was also one of the most important composers of avant-garde music of the second half of the 20th century. But let's look at the building. First, you know, you see on the right, just like we saw those you know, recorded frequencies from Mozart and Jimi Hendrix in the work of Kopf Himmelblau. Here we see these were done by Yannis Xenakis. These were not done by Le Corbusier. This is the building, and in my opinion, was an astonishing building. Look at this. Now, why was this destroyed? You know, this infuriates me. You know, it's true, most of the time, buildings built for, you know, world exhibitions or whatever are destroyed. And it's very sad. And we talk about sustainability. Well, if you build such a building, how could you destroy it? Well, it was destroyed. And it's a great loss. This building was done with the collaboration of 3 people. Le Corbusier, Yannis Xenakis, and Varese, a French composer. So you had actually a musician, an architect, and the musician architect, that is Yannis Xenakis. And inside, you can see on YouTube, you can see the projection, the video with the film that was created specifically to be projected inside this pavilion. And here you have, you know, when I look at this picture, I smile. You have Le Corbusier, of course, on the left, and Yannis Xenakis on the right. But what is strange about this picture, and maybe you do not know, Le Corbusier lost the sight in his right eye when he was 28. And Yannis Xenakis also had only one functioning eye. Something happened to him in the Second World War. So now we have here 2 people, 2 architects, but together they only had 2 eyes, functioning eyes. They are, you know, waiting for the train to bring them back to Paris, I guess, from Brussels. Anyway, back to the brilliant building, and it is a brilliant building. And, you know, it's impossible to remain without emotions when you see so much creativity. It's impossible. This is a, you know, a kind of a collage. Somebody did this, you know, was done after, you know, was not done by Yannis Xenakis or the office of Le Corbusier. But I think it's a nice collage of images. It is a famous building. And in my opinion, is one of the best buildings that came out of Le Corbusier's office, and different from most his other works. Now, if Yannis Xenakis was indeed the main author of this building, we do not quite know, although the experts seem to be inclined to think so. But I also know that Yannis Xenakis built a few buildings without Le Corbusier on his own, and they are not as brilliant as those built together with Le Corbusier. So it's, I would say that the proximity of Le Corbusier, you know, helped arrive at a higher level of excellence. But nevertheless, Yannis Xenakis was an admirable creator, and I will end this presentation actually with a building he built by himself, without Le Corbusier, which kind of contradicts what I just said, for an exhibition in front of Centre Georges Pompidou. Look at the plan. It's magnificent. It's free. It's you know, unpredictable and immeasurable in a way. Although we had an engineer here who told us that actually the structural system is very logical, and it's you know, it has a coherence, but the plan itself, if we look at the plan, it's very free. We look at the model, and yes, again and again, it proclaims freedom. Look at the sketches. These were done by Yanis Xenakis. And you have mathematics, you have music, and you have architecture. And this is a contemporary rendering, a digital rendering of this brilliant building. Very, very sad that this building was destroyed. I mean, anyway, maybe one day will be rebuilt, maybe, because it can be rebuilt. But you see, it's a system which is not anti-system, and it uses geometry, it uses mathematics, but the final result goes beyond the measurable, beyond the predictability of numbers or arithmetics or mathematics. Here it is during the construction. I mean, you see the church, the old church here, and then you see this building. And this was done in the 50s. You know, if this building would have built now, this year, we would have said, wow, but it was built 70 years ago almost. And I end this presentation with another work by Yanis Xenakis. In this case, he worked alone. The polytope or the diatope in front of Centre Georges Pompidou, where there was a retrospective of his work. Yes, of the man born in Braila. This is the building. So you can tell that actually there is a relationship between this building and the building that we just saw. And this was done by the composer of avant-garde music, Yanis Xenakis. So you see here, le diatope devant le Centre Georges Pompidou, sources, the archives, Xenakis at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. Here we see the Centre Georges Pompidou, and actually this creates the bridge between this presentation and the next one on Niki, the great French artist who has a beautiful sculptural work right next to Centre Georges Pompidou, Niki de Saint-Phal. So this is the building by, or the structure, the pavilion, the building, yes, by Yanis Xenakis. Born in Braila, born and raised in Braila by until 9. But I have to tell you, Braila is a city where I don't know how to say, with many geniuses. If you search on Wikipedia, you won't believe it. For a small city to have such a large number of remarkable people born there, something was there. I don't know how to explain it. Anyway, on the back, the building by Renzo Piano and Sir Richard Rogers and the great engineer Peter Rice, Centre Georges Pompidou, and in the front, the pavilion built by Yanis Xenakis. This one was also destroyed, and again, it is hard for me to believe it. And you see here, you know, the tumultuousness of the musical spirit, but which is also based on mathematics, and the mathematics allowed for the measurements and allowed for the building to come into being. You see, Centre Georges Pompidou, geste de lumière et de son, gesture of light and sound, le diatope, Xenakis. And here, well, we don't see too much of it, but many people, this was, I think, in 1978. Of course, on the left, you don't see it in this picture, is the museum for Constantin Brâncuș, and this is the diatope by Yanis Xenakis. And here we see a view from the top. The museum for Brâncuș apparently was not yet built, or something is going on here. Maybe it was during the construction, but you see here the pavilion by Yanis Xenakis, and of course, Centre Georges Pompidou. And the next presentation will show a magnificent sculptural installation by Niki de Saint-Phal right here in this space. In fact, you are going to see some pictures where you see her sculptures and fragments of a part of the this corner of the Centre Georges Pompidou. And this was an ease, I would say. You know, he died, but he didn't die. Yannis Xenakis. You don't see here in the shadows. So as I said, he was disfigured by the war, and he lost his sight in one of the eyes. Here again, you know, it's the same thing. It's but you see, this was his room. You know, you see notations, mathematical notations, and it moves me. He was a brilliant musician, and I would say a brilliant architect who studied engineering and mathematics, and arrived in Paris and worked for Le Corbusier. And he had an important role. There is a picture in the office of Le Corbusier on Rue de Sèvres, where in front of everybody, there are, I don't know, 10, 15 people there. On the right is Le Corbusier, and on the left is Yannis Xenakis. So he had an important role in the office of Le Corbusier. And Le Corbusier hired him without asking him, you know, did you study architecture? Show me your diploma. Tell me what grade you received for your diploma. Nothing of that sort. But the man, you know, received, you know, the acceptance to work there based on his merits, intellectual and artistic. So, you know, we see here, you know, images of cosmos, of planets or whatever. Well, the musician had cosmic aspirations, and I truly encourage you to listen to his music on YouTube. It's a very moving music done with the means of the present, meaning, you know, computers, technology, but the music is about emotions. And the hands of the creator should be looked at, because without them, the creator, the artist, the architect would be reduced to much less, if not nothing.